Okay, thanks for everyone for coming. Today's panel's on export development, export ready. I'm Nich Davies. I run a small music company in Canada, Alberta-based, called Hurry Hard Music. We have kind of a bunch of different record labels, and we're just launching a new distribution wing of the company, and we're basically an artist development company. So I think that's why they asked me to moderate this panel. And we have two really amazing leaders, I would say, in the kind of Western Canadian music scene. Klassen, who's executive director of Alberta Music, I'm sure most people have ran into. And how long have you been? Like 5 years?
I've been in my current role for 7.5 years.
Yeah, okay. Yeah.
I've been with the organization for well over 10, but yeah, we'll just stay with 7.5.
Yeah. Carly, I've known Carly, I think the only time I've ever known you you've been in Alberta Music.
Yeah, I started at Alberta Music. Well, I started in Alberta Music in 2008 as the administrative assistant. And it was just because I wanted to work in the music industry and I didn't know how because I wasn't a musician. Mm-hmm. So it was a great learning opportunity to learn about like the different roles on the industry side of things. And since then, I've moved my way up and became executive director.
Yeah, that's even thinking about like export development and like developing as an artist or as an industry person. I think especially in Alberta and Canada, it's kind of a big thing. A big path is to move through kind of the not-for-profit system or the export development kind of system. It's a big pathway. It's like there's so many people here that have done it. I think I'm a bit of an outlier that I've never kind of dabbled into that, but some of our team has, like Jess Marsh as well has. Who else coming to mind? Like, it's a big thing to kind of move in and out, and you kind of learn a lot about the industry. I think being able to go and you can kind of go to a lot of events too.
Yeah, I would say like the export side for industry side, people wanting to work on that side of the sector is newly developing.
Right.
Yeah, I would say like even 10 years ago, it wasn't as common for people to know that they could go to a different country to go to a conference to develop their industry side of their business. And it's just started to really develop the more that artists are starting to go.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah. And just like kind of the insights you can get from going to a different country and seeing how the indie music scene kind of exists and how it operates in different countries that I think are maybe a little bit more set up or just have a lot more.
Yeah, I think it's like a great experience to do that internationally for, again, the industry side. Artists, we'll get to that, but on an industry side perspective, because I would say like there's a lot of businesses that are further developed internationally. So it kind of gives you the snapshot of like what a startup company could look like, build those relationships, and then you start that back here.
Yeah, and totally. And similarly, I think with artist teams, like how these artist teams are kind of operating, especially like let's say Germany or the UK, which was very robust as far as developing artist teams and like what that looks like on the road, how they look like even showing up to a showcase festival. I think to me has been really interesting to see. And then we have Liam Prost here, who's program manager. Is that your title at BreakOut West? Or?
Yeah. I had to fight for that one. I used to have a really dumb title. I was the creative content coordinator, which makes it sound like I was working in marketing, but I'm like the only programmer. So it's So I'm like, okay, yeah.
So
Give
Liam,
me a title that has program in it.
Yeah. So Liam is basically responsible for programming, I think, all the artists and most of the conference. Is that correct?
Yeah, I do both sides, which is great. Well, I guess we have three sides to what we do, and I should mention as well that Carly and Alberta Music kind of owns us. They're, the big
music
mamas.
industry associations are members of Western Canadian Music Alliance,
Indeed, and our organization kind of aggregates all the Western provinces. We were kind of talking earlier about like what the West is, which is obviously very broad. It's most of the country, not really the West, but it's BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, as well as the Yukon and Northwest Territories. And honorarily, Nunavut, although they don't have an industry association to be a member of us, we still accept artists from that area. But my role there is that I kind of work in programming, so we have a formal submission process and we have kind of a formal jurying for artists that I kind of adjudicate and kind of shoo along, and we kind of work together with the music industry associations like Alberta to determine like who's export ready from these provinces and who should be performing, who is kind of at the right stage to kind of get the most out of the opportunity that we provide, and of course, who is best matched to the kind of programming we would typically do. So it's there's a bit of a balancing act to be done there. There's some artists who maybe don't need what we have because they're doing way more, and maybe there's some artists who maybe are a little bit more on the developing side that maybe need a little bit more development to be at the level where when they meet the kind of industry folks that we bring out, that they have something to offer. And then as well, I also work on the conference side, which is kind of a bit of a delight. So I get to kind of, we have a bit of a team there. We have like an international coordinator who helps us rope together a network to figure out who to bring out. We typically bring out between like 30 and 45 international industry professionals. This is part of a program that's funded by Factor, so they have a bit of a sense of who we should engage. So they want us to bring out industry buyers. It's a kind of part of their vision of what export readiness is. They want us to bring out people like label manager or like label A&Rs, agents, managers, people who have an active interest in developing and buying into an artist career. So we typically bring out 30 to 45 internationals. We have an international coordinator that helps develop that network. And then we kind of put together panels like this. It's honestly an event that's a lot like this one. I would say it's maybe a little bit bigger, but
it's
really
one of my favorite. I'm biased, but even
we're
if I
biased
wasn't involved, it's one of my favorite events to go to, just because I think it's the perfect size of conference and festival.
Yeah, and it's really wonderful to work with Alberta Music and the other MIAs to kind of, because they have an incredible network and they do offer such great programming that helps artists really get what they need, get their ducks in a row, so that when they come to these opportunities like SoundOff and like BreakOut West, that they kind of know what they need to do and that they know what they're doing. And they can get connected to great industry professionals, like somebody like Nich, who often comes and does great business. And
yeah, I've been coming for many years. Not every year I've been going, but certainly many years. And to me, one of the critical best things about BreakOut West is that, and I'm sure it's a massive challenge for you guys, is moving to a new city basically every year. And what that does is, like, for Western Canadians, especially for me, is like you actually get to know these cities a lot better than you do, say, if you're just coming in, doing a show, leaving the next morning. You're kind of in and out. You get to know the cities quite a bit better and meet the locals. And that's kind of the big thing, I think, when you're developing your artist as a market, when you're developing a new market. Like, export could be exporting to UK, could be exporting to Germany, but you can also think about it exporting to Saskatchewan, developing a market in Saskatoon, say, developing a fan base where you can actually, have a hard tickets amount of hard tickets you can sell at that, so you can profit off the show. Expanding your reach, I think, is a really big thing in my opinion. And I think
and developing an artist network and an industry network as well. I think one thing I think is really valuable about BreakOut West, not to toot our own horn too bad, but it's like if you get to, like, this year we were in Saskatoon. If you're not familiar with Saskatoon, this is an excuse to go hang out, meet a bunch of the people who work there, boots on the ground, maybe see artists from that city as well, so that when, if you're an artist yourself, you can go and be like, okay, well, maybe I sound like the Garys, or maybe I really like Rookie Camise, and I get to meet that person, and maybe when they're coming through Calgary, maybe they open my show, or maybe when I go to Saskatoon, I open their show. And now I've been in Amigos, so I know that's the place that I want to play because it sounds great and it matches my vibe, and the margaritas are fucking sick. And I think that's, honestly, an enormous amount of the value that we provide. And I think even beyond kind of showcasing and being a part and doing that industry work, I think just being a part and getting to meet people like that is just so much of the value of it.
Yeah, I totally agree.
Yeah.
It's
I agree. I think that's part of the key to talking about artist development is going to something really specific to BreakOut West, and you touched on it. It's you get to learn a new city every single year, and it's the right size city. They don't go to sometimes they go, but that doesn't do well necessarily in the big cities like Vancouver. They really focus on the smaller markets, which helps artists in their domestic export development.
Yes, yeah, I couldn't agree more. And so let's also maybe touch on kind of how Alberta Music and how kind of BreakOut West is focused on their own, BreakOut West Festival, but then you're also doing a lot of reciprocal agreements with other festivals and kind of developing networks, let's say maybe Focus Wales or something like that. How does that work out, and how can kind of artists kind of maybe leverage with BreakOut West to play these other festivals or touch these other markets?
Yeah, that's like a big part of like what we kind of think if you're, at the level where, and I know the export readiness is like the hot button, the word of the day here, but it's like if you have enough going on that there's like enough value and you have kind of curiosity and good reason to be like looking at doing export work in other territories, something like BreakOut West is a place where you can go and meet folks who are, programmers at international industry festivals, which is something that we do partners with, or other types of buyers. But yeah, we do court relationships with certain types of export stuff. I mean, say less so than maybe some other, there's like lots of great, Canadian companies that can provide export opportunities. We're just one, and honestly, like there's some people do a lot more. Alberta Music is one of them, obviously. There's SEMA, Women in Music Canada now. There's just so many great opportunities, but we cultivate a few, and a part of them are kind of what we do is we look at international industry events that are like ours, and we kind of see if we can kind of strike up some kind of arrangement. So Focus Wales is one that we've had a really long-standing relationship with. There's a great kinship there because like Wales is kind of, it's a region that is maybe in some ways overshadowed by a larger one. It's a sub-region within the United Kingdom. People who are Welsh are, ethnically Welsh. It has its own language, and so there's a bit of a kinship between like Wales and I think like the TRC project here in Canada. Like there's a little bit of an Indigenous language revitalization project there, so they see some kinship here, but also it just being like a geographical niche, like a place that people are from and it's part of their identity and they want to live there and they want to create there. They maybe want to create in their own language. Same here too, like in BreakOut West, we're like, we don't want you to move to Toronto or Montreal. We want you to live in the place that you're inspired to live, make the music you want to make in your community. And so, and their event's really similar size. It's like in Wrexham, Wales, which if you guys seen that Ryan Reynolds TV show about their football club, it's that place. It's a great hang, and you like go and you see, hip hop acts in the back of these pubs with big skylights. And then if those programmers, they come to our festival and they typically book who they have it. There's typically 5 or 6 acts from Western Canada. Almost all of them they see at our event. And same to inverse. I think at our event, we accept 2 of their acts, and they often find that to be pretty, I think, beneficial to themselves as well. Some of those acts come back and they reinvest in the Canadian music market as well. We only have a couple of those opportunities now for maybe a few reasons, but yeah, Focus Wales being one. We also have a party at South by Southwest. We partner with Alberta Music on a lot of stuff. Honestly, we take a lot of credit for the work that they do. At M for Montreal next week, I think that thing has got our name on it, even though we don't do that much work on it. Carly, maybe want to speak to the experts.
Yeah, so Alberta Music and most of the music industry associations have an export program. It's called something different in every province. We really simplify it in Alberta and just call it export development.
It's better than some. I really hate the SEMA one.
Alberta Music's, it's in the process of rebrand. It used to be called Livestock, which what you won't know what livestock is, but so we just simplified export. And we work with a lot of the provinces. We work with BreakOut West. We work with SEMA, which is the Canadian Independent Music Association, in putting on showcases at conference festivals. So any festival that we're going to showcase artists at has to have a conference component because it has to have that professional development, which is part of the artist development, export development combination, where it's if you're going to go export your music, you need to have the education aspect of it, which means we want to showcase artists that are able to take advantage of an opportunity that may present itself at those international events. You have to be ready. So we've done showcases at the Reeperbahn Festival in Hamburg, Germany, Brighton, UK, Focus Wales, Americana, UK, which is in UK, and Nashville, Americana. We've done something in Guadalajara, Mexico. So we're always looking at new markets to export artists to. A lot of that decision-making comes from the artists that approach us as to figuring out what markets those should be. We're not just going to put on a showcase and just like try it out. And we're looking at developing some exports in Australia because we have found that there's a lot of Alberta artists that have specifically gone to Australia recently and have had some successes. So that's another market we're looking at going to. But I know it's interesting because when you think of export artists and who should be going. I think there's like an industry standard checklist that people follow, which is like you have to have like high streaming numbers and team members and significant performance experience. But that, like the reality of like most things in the music industry, sometimes that doesn't work. Like the traditional checklist doesn't work. Sometimes an artist just fits into that market.
Totally, and sometimes the timelines.
And the timelines
of artist development, like some artists will just blow up quite quickly, go from very nothing. It's now in the kind of the Instagram, TikTok world, you know, you can have.
It's totally like, that's the thing is like there's an artist that can, all of a sudden every showcase festival wants this artist because they have a song on TikTok. And so that's a really interesting way to export an artist because they have a ton of international industry that want to work with that artist, even though they don't fit that like criteria of what export ready is.
Yeah, and that's like just like the model of shifting what it means to be export ready, and like what even. So maybe let's try to get into that a little bit more, thinking of idea of export. Like what is that? What are we exporting? Are we exporting our live shows? Are we exporting our music? And then kind of maybe if we can dial some numbers, like are we looking at the Spotify numbers? Are we focused more on Instagram? Are we focused on the team that's, you know, the credibility of the team that's behind the artist or the live show? Like, are you watching videos of the live show?
For us at Alberta Music, what we're like, one of our main programs is exporting the show, the artist that's showcasing. So the music, I guess it would be for the one specific export program that we run. So that, you know, it's hard to say. We don't necessarily always look at like the team they have when we export artists. If they're looking for management, they're looking for support, more times we're able to support them in that role, which is where we step in as being representatives on the ground. It's preferable that they have some team representative, but it's not necessary because, again, that's part of developing your team. Maybe you don't want to focus on domestic representation. You only want international, so you can't, you know, we support in that. And it really, like, social media numbers, video views, streaming numbers, they do matter. Again, it's not like a deal breaker, but again, you have to be prepared to go to another market. So you need to be able to show that you're able to market your music, that you have a following. You have to have a reason as to why you want to go to Germany, a reason you want to go to the UK. If you look and you're like, oh, my streaming numbers show that I have a ton of audience in the UK. I sound like these artists. I really want to work with this label or this team, which is like your dream team. You kind of have to have goals as to why you want to go. We have so many artists that reach out to us and they say, I want to go play South by Southwest in Austin. And you're like, cool, why? Because it's South by Southwest.
It's a checklist
and
for them.
It's a checklist, and like that's not going to benefit you as an artist at all. Like so many people aren't going to look at your artistic resume and see that you showcased at these events, and you know, in 5 years you might not have. It's a long game, but you have to, you know, if you show that you've showcased at all these events and you're going back and you want to go back to South by for the same reason you went 5 years ago, that's okay. But why didn't you achieve that goal 5 years ago, or like what was the process 5 years ago?
Yeah, and I think that the process of discovering artists at these festivals, just in a small little thing, discovering an artist, and all of a sudden there's a bidding war against an artist at a festival, that's kind of disappeared, right?
It has disappeared, and it changes so much. Like when we did a showcase last year in Guadalajara, like Mexico, it's like Mexico and India are the highest numbers for streaming music. And it's because most of the residents are taking public transportation for hours and hours a day. And so for that aspect of things, it was like the streaming numbers when an artist went to showcase, when they returned from Mexico, you know, one of the results of that is like, are you seeing an increase in streaming numbers? Because you're just in one of the countries that have the highest streaming numbers. But it's going to depend on what market you go to. And I think that differs between streaming and even like going to like traditional media. Australia, you'd still go to Australia and tour, and you still want to book a radio tour there. Because that's just...
Because it's a different market, right? Yeah.
So it's going to depend on... Each market is different, and your goals in each market are going to change, and that sort of determines if your music or your plan is going to fit into that market.
How about if we're thinking of a checklist for a new artist? Let's say there's a new artist and they have no international experience, no team really, but they have some songs and maybe some high quality recordings. Let's say, what would you say that the focus maybe should be trying to get into these festivals, trying to get into a local festival? What's kind of the first step to become export ready in your mind?
A level of local audience.
Yeah. Okay.
Experience performing. The biggest thing is performance experience. Because if you're going to go to any showcase internationally or domestic, you want to be able to present the best version of what you are at that time. So you want that. Quality of recording, again, it depends on the type of music you play, the genre, or like the sound you're going for. It could be super high quality, it could be lo-fi. It completely depends on your sound.
Yeah.
And so it's like that one's a hard one. And like, I don't want to keep saying like your goals, but like what you want your outcome of going outside of your domestic market. Like, is it exporting domestically, or do you want to export internationally for a specific reason? Social media numbers and streaming are obviously pros, but again, not, and like team members, again, you don't need to necessarily have a team. But at the end of the day, like if you're self-managed, that's fine, but you have to have really specific of like, again, goals. Why do you want to go? Why do you want to go to that market? What are you trying to develop in that market? As Liam also is an artist manager. If you have an artist that wants to go internationally, what are you trying to do as a manager to help them in that market?
Yeah, this is kind of funny. I feel like I'm sure a lot of you guys like apply to these types of export opportunities. Has anybody done that? Like applied to things like Reaperbahn or South by and find it to be a little prohibitive? In my opinion, and especially as a manager, when I'm filling out these applications, the difference between a good application and a bad application is what you're saying. It's rationale. It's because like if you know what you're looking to get out of it, it's much easier for somebody like me on the receiving end of these applications to look at it and be like, okay, well, you're looking to get an agent or a publisher in X and X region. Well, this year we're actually doing a focus on this region. So that's like really easy to match one-to-one whether or not we're doing that. But if you come to these things and you're just like, hey, well, I just want to build my fan base. Like, great. That means absolutely nothing. Like, absolutely nothing. Not to say that that's like not a worthy goal. It absolutely is. But it's just to these people who are programming these types of things, you need to have a sense of what you're looking for, but also a sense of like actually why, like, and region to region. I think we're talking about this so broadly. I think like there's Mexico and there's Germany and there's United States. All these regions are so different and they behave differently, and there's good reasons to approach anyone or differently. So I think like you're saying, kind of following where maybe your existing organic audience is developing, or even just like if there's like a cultural modality to the thing that you do. It's like if you're like making crazy gothy shit, like maybe you want to go to Eastern Europe and there's like really cool stuff there. Like you play it like Ment, or you could play it like Talon. And like sometimes there are people like us there. Like there's like BreakOut West at Talon Music Week, or there's Alberta Music at CO Pop or something. But it's not always consistent. But doesn't mean you don't have access to those things. Like last year, we sent Astral Swans to the other one in Latvia. Why am I blanking on the name of it? Spike. Sorry, in Bulgaria. And that's not something that SEMA or Alberta Music or BreakOut West directly is brokering that relationship. But there's like an organic interest. I think there was like, we had met that programmer. It seemed like the music was well aligned. So we kind of just made the leap there. I think that's a project too that like is really critically darling and really interesting, but maybe doesn't have crazy streaming numbers, but like also hits really hard to press. And so we're like, okay, where are the kind of places that this kind of wacky music and like people who are really niche, maybe people who buy records because put out 2 splits last year, are going to be interested in it. And so that's kind of how, when I'm approaching, and I just be like, pick these things and be like, what makes sense? It's like, where do you want to go? Where do you have like a cultural interest? Where is the kind of music you make actively hitting harder? So same things, like Thomas, who's playing tonight, is another artist that I work with a little bit. And we're like, oh, they're like UK. We have family relationships in the UK. We really love things like the Arctic Monkeys. We kind of sound like that. And so we're kind of putting the time and attention to it. And last year they played Focus Wales. They really put in the time and thing to make it work. They're like, here's industry targets. Like, we're really interested in transgressive records, really interested in working with 7 artists on agency. And maybe high-level goals that maybe you're not going to get time one, but at least is indicative that you've done your research, that you know and you care. Because the thing that we're trying to avoid is sending an artist out to do one of these things. They play a show to 5 people in a place that they've never been, and they come home disappointed, which is honestly like a more common experience than you'd think that it is. Even something, you know what, I'm curious if you guys have any thoughts about CMW? Just, on the domestic side? Because like, I know people are really, has anyone here played Canadian Music Week or North by Northeast? Like, I think, in my opinion, I think these festivals get a bad rap in a sense, not because I think sometimes you'll go and you play those shows and you'll get, a 10 p.m., Friday night at, the Horseshoe or the Cameron House, and it's spectacular and there's 200 people there and they're having the greatest time, but sometimes you're playing at 4 a.m. in the Junction and you don't control that. But you should go anyway, I think. I think that's one that's necessary to do because there's funding attached to it, but you can like from places like Factor, potentially even people like Alberta Music, which is really amazing to see them have an export funding program this year. Places like Canada Council to go and take part and be a part of the conference thing, and even if you're just do all the networking, even if the show is bad, do the networking.
Yeah, I think there's that's the thing. There's not a lot of domestic showcase opportunities within Canada. So there's BreakOut West.
Is this
CMW, which is now called Departure, rebranded this week.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, rebranded this week. And
more of the tech focus, comedy focus now.
They're going to introduce fashion, culinary, tech.
Yeah.
So trying to depart from what they were before. It'll be totally interesting to see how that conference develops with a rebrand, to see if there is in my opinion, a reinvested interest in music. I would love to see a little bit more focus on that. But I think you have Nova Scotia Music Week, ECMAs. There's not a lot of domestic showcase opportunities,
and some of those are gated too.
And
we have a partnership with those places, but also we actually didn't renew this past year. There was no Western artists playing the ECMA last year.
Exactly. So, so it's very limited to have domestic showcase opportunities, and that's one of the caveats that actually some of the funders that we get are putting on some of our export programming is that artists need to have showcased domestically before they're eligible for an export opportunity, because I think there has been such a strong focus on international exporting over the last 5+ years that the Canadian funders are seeing that the Canadian market is being left behind. And so, they have this amazing funding opportunity to develop their Canadian talents internationally, and they're not seeing the development domestically anymore. So it's kind of the way to sort of bring it back to domestic development before moving on to international.
Yeah, and to get experience in the showcase kind of vibe, I think as artists can be huge.
Yeah.
Get some showcases under your belt, because doing a local show compared to flying to a new city and showing up and playing on equipment that you might not be super familiar with is a totally different vibe, totally different kind of skill set you have to develop as an artist or an artist team to show up, fly in, do a show, make it feel like a real show, even though you had 10 minutes to set up.
Nick has done this as an artist too.
Oh, many times.
This is a very high production thing.
For our production, sure. We try to do. I think we try to do bigger productions, and I think most of that's born off seeing what other European kind of productions are showing up. They're showing up, rigging in they have their own front of house guy. Every single band has it. And seeing especially CO Pop was a great one to see, where it's every show is the stage is fully struck. Re-put on 10 minutes and the show is off, and you have your own front of house. So I think, in my view, that could be an interesting thing to develop if we're focusing more domestically with showcases. Let's make sure that the productions are kind of at the level that it is going to attract international talent. Because you are competing against these companies and acts that have pretty great shows. For example, The Great Escape, seeing some of the shows that are happening there, very, very high production. Even Focus Whale, some of the more top headliners, big shows, right? Yeah,
but it's tricky when you're at some of these things, especially Great Escape or worse, South by Southwest, being oh, I'm sorry, I can't come to your showcase. I'm going to see Dolly Parton.
Yeah.
Which is an experience that you can have at South by Southwest. Yeah, and it's it can be kind of tough to like show up to these things as like a little buddy, and not, and that's why I think you need to be so prepared. You really need to know exactly where you sit and exactly what you're doing, as well as do all the work in advance, like do all the research, send out as many cold emails as you can, which is thankless.
Yeah, especially with South by, because like sometimes artists are playing 15 shows, maybe 20 shows at South by, right?
Oh yeah, and that the delegate list of both South by Southwest and Great Escape is like pretty impenetrable. It's like hundreds of people in that.
Yeah, so don't do South by as your first showcase. And so the other thing I was thinking about is, especially if you're thinking about learning how to kind of engage with these showcase festivals, would you think it's a good idea for artists to consider just flying out to a showcase, checking it out as just a kind of just get a wristband or get a delegate pass, get a conference pass perhaps? Is that a good idea, or is that
I think so.
I think so. I say go to BreakOut West first.
Yeah, I agree.
Go to BreakOut West first. Meet the people that are there. Yeah, but it's like every province supports BreakOut West in bringing, like, they have an incredible international program. So they're bringing internationals. Like each, I think, province brings 5 internationals to BreakOut West. So you don't need to travel that far. You stay within Western Canada and you get to meet these internationals. But I still think there is, if you have the means to be able to go to a conference internationally and just go as you're an artist that goes to experience it as an audience member, you're gonna experience it in a totally different way than you are as a performing artist. And there's a benefit to that as well. You're not on a schedule of sound check, or rarely get a sound check, but you're not on a schedule of like where you need to be. Your business meetings are scheduled for this time. You can kind of flow with like meet people, and just it's really a great way to meet someone and just see who they're interested in, and you get to really understand the local market, the local talent that's showcasing at that. So it's going to be a totally different experience if you go as a audience member.
Oh, totally. If you're going with like a band showcasing at a thing, you're suddenly wrangling the band. You have to worry about rehearsals, load-in times. You got to figure everything out, like a comms, like make sure all these things. Particularly if you're like an indie enough band, you're not traveling with a TM. You're dealing with a lot of these things yourself. So it's like any way that you can kind of, I think, do these things a little bit on the sly, get a sense of them. I think it's particularly something like BreakOut West, or even like it used to be. I don't know, maybe this isn't the case at CMW. If you just like applied, they would give you a free badge. I'm not sure if they still do that. But and sometimes too, even if I know a lot of the money is locked behind showcasing because that's where the expense is. It's flying all these people out. But it's a lot cheaper to fly yourself. But also there's not funding available. Like there's funding from SOCAN Foundation for travel. If you're like a songwriter and receive 3 SOCAN checks, you can potentially access that money. You should look at in Canada Council. They have 2 different flavors of travel grant. There's both a tour grant and a travel grant, and the travel grant is a little bit easier to access. And that could potentially really make a lot of difference for you. But yeah, I think there's a lot of value to just attending this big part. But also maybe there's other ways you could do it. Maybe you manage your friend's band and you TM for them while they're playing. Go and play the cowbell for your friend who is playing Reeperbahn, and that will get you a wristband to that festival, and you can get a sense. And then when you apply with your project next year, you got a much better sense of it. And I think,
and you also have to remember it's again, I say it's a long game, as in artists that are being booked for the Great Escape in May 2025 are scheduled right now.
Yeah.
Well, not that one. That one in particular, they notify you like a month ago.
Yeah, well, I know. Some of them don't notify you with enough notice. But another thing...
But I think the application deadline is at least passed, or it's about right now.
But a lot of them will schedule quite far in advance. But another thing you really have to think of is if you're going to be going as an artist versus just checking it out, is if you're just going to go check it out, don't need a visa. In some of these places, you need a visa, and that could be... we've had artists that have applied for South by Southwest and been notified in February for their March showcase, and you're not going because you can't get a visa in time.
Yeah.
Well, the nice thing is both South by and Treefort is if you're not paid, you actually don't need the visa, which is nice. But you should.
South by is a little tricky. If you're playing an official showcase, you don't need a visa, but if you're playing an unofficial showcase, it depends. It depends who you get to the border.
You can get boned, particularly if you're traveling with all this gear. They will give you what's for.
Yeah. So and some of these internationals, opportunities, again, not to get into specifics, but that is something that you need to keep in mind as well, is that there is certain visa requirements, and that also is going to determine the size of the band that you play with.
Totally. And I guess that gets me to thinking, if we're thinking of an artist spending their own money, maybe they're not getting any grants, so there's no grants on the table. Is money better spent kind of going to these markets, developing themselves internationally, or is it maybe better spent sitting in their basement in Calgary, developing their art, and maybe more focus on maybe more digital content, digital media? What do you think about that?
So I think that's going to
depends on the
be.
band,
I think it's
Yeah.
completely dependent on what kind of artist you want to be. I think regardless if you're getting grant money or you're spending your own money, you have to look at it as like someone or yourself is investing in you, and like what's at the end, what is your return in the investment? Is it you want to break even, you want to make money back on that? If that's the important part, your plan is going to be a lot different. Maybe it isn't going to be an international plan. Or is your return on investment building your team, increase streaming numbers? Like it's going to be very dependent on individual goals.
Yeah, totally. Like, what's the kind of project you have? Like, are you like a basement producer that like, yeah, it's like honestly most of your revenue is coming from streaming numbers? Like, yeah, maybe you like don't need to worry about these tours, but like, or if we were talking before about like Nashville, like going down and be like, if you're a songwriter, that's like a totally different kind of export to just like go down as a songwriter and take meetings. And my understanding, don't need a visa to do that, right? To take those kinds of meetings. Different kind of export, different kind of thing. But if you're like a 5-piece indie rock band who's going to Reeperbahn, there's a bit of a strategy to play there where it's like actually there's money locked behind doing these things in particular. So it's actually kind of a benefit because it unlocks money from Factor, which is nice. And so if you have a release within an eligible window, that money is like, I don't want to say guaranteed, but it's pretty easy to get from the Factor Live Performance program. You're eligible to up to $7,000 a year for international export money. And each of those applications, there's like, depending on how big a band you bring out, it scales. Depending on how far you go, it scales. That also makes it a lot easier if you do a showcase to go to somebody like Canada Council and get the travel funding. But yeah, it's I think doing these things actually makes it a lot easier to like know that you've got that and be like, okay, great. Now I can actually book like 3 shows on either side or whatever and kind of make it worthwhile because these shows often don't pay very much money. Sure, it unlocks some Factor money, but the flights are expensive, the accoms are expensive. But then suddenly if you got 5 other club shows, you can get €200 at each. And the nice thing about, like you go to like Reeperbahn or something, like the show deals are much more favorable. So you like go and you'll get a guarantee, you'll get a meal, you'll get a comms, because most of those shows have that even at the club show level. It can make it worthwhile. And also it's a nice thing, you get to see more than one place. Maybe develop a nice local audience in some other cities and not just, because like honestly a lot of these festivals are like not necessarily a great audience development opportunity, which is kind of part of why I say like don't say you're going to go build your fan base because sometimes like you're not playing for real fans, like you're playing for industry people.
Yeah, it depends on the festival, right? Because like maybe The Great Escape would be an example of one that does have like a fan base.
That's true, because there are headlines at that and stuff.
Yeah, but what I was going to maybe point to as well is that you can use these festivals as really a strong pitch to kind of get your foot in the market. So if you say you get say Alberta Music helps you get an ad to CO Pop or Reeperbahn or something, now all of a sudden you're relevant to Spotify in that market. You're relevant. If you go there and start creating content that's geotagged to that market, the algorithm is going to start favoring you for those fans in that market. There's lots of things you can do just by actually being in the market to kind of gain relevance. So sometimes you're maybe not going to develop a bunch of fans, you're maybe not going to get a record deal, or you're not going to maybe get a booking agent right from the first go. But you can actually make fans in these markets, in my opinion, and that can make a huge difference for convincing these people to bring you back again, but then also to actually start developing export. You're not even export ready, you're actually exporting these markets. People are maybe buying your merch online or coming to your shows, joining your mailing list, those type of things.
Oh, totally. Carly was talking about, we were talking about Musha and the Spanks before this. One of my favorite, I can't remember what festival it was, but it's like, at one point they were just like dropping off records at radio stations and off stores for consignment. And like later in that week, I went into the record store, they were spinning the record. It was like up on the side, in the record shop, coffee shop. And that's like doing the real work, like they actually care, like who's actually listening to this.
Totally. And you can make actually being there in person can make a huge difference, especially to these small kind of niche. If you're doing a niche genre, something that's not going to be major pop, and people are going to maybe like a coffee shop is going to have a little vinyl store that they're all about, say house music, or they're all about reggae music or something. Then you can actually find those like 5 people maybe in that country that could like kind of break it for you, right? And it's like in Germany, not a huge Americana scene in Germany, but there's like 10 people that if you can convince those 10 people, you can do a whole German tour just by kind of being aware of a few people that make a huge, these are tastemakers in the industry. So it's way easier if you're doing a niche genre, but it might, like Americana is not niche here, but it's pretty niche in the UK even, right?
Flavors of it. Dead South, though. Dead South. Stadiums. Also Schlager.
Yeah, and Dead South basically broke in Germany, right?
Yeah.
So I was actually touring with them in Germany when they were starting to break, and it was really crazy to see because, you know, they're doing this very niche show.
It's so crazy. Like the Dead South is a band that I like always joke that I've been to a lot of the like conference festivals. I always joke that I never need to see the Dead South ever again because I probably saw them for like 10 years at like Folk Alliance, playing these small rooms, trying to build their audience, trying to make it, playing Reaper, like finally, and then they broke, and they broke.
Yeah.
And they're huge now. But again, that's part of they would go to Folk Alliance. They had their plan of exactly the type of people they wanted to meet. They discovered that, they have a thing in Germany. Mm-hmm. They went to BreakOut West, they met the German delegates, and they had a plan to invest in the German market. And they started working with Jorg, record guy in Hamburg.
With Devil Duck Records.
Devil Duck Records, yeah, thank you. That is not his genre of music that he likes.
But he likes Saskatchewan.
But he likes Saskatchewan. Yeah. He likes small cities
does.
and towns.
Yeah.
But, you know, even though, like, that's a perfect example of someone that doesn't, you know, work with that type of music, but was invested in their drive, invested in them they just kept showing up everywhere and hung out. And, you know, he's like, okay, I don't want you on my label, but I'm gonna help you. I'm invested in making sure that you succeed in this market. And he still goes to BreakOut West. Jorg does, and
we had a Devil Duck party this year.
Yeah,
brought a band brought one of the bands he actually likes, Vicent, like this like post-hardcore band from Germany.
Yeah, so something Alberta Music does every year is before BreakOut West, we do a pre-BreakOut West showcase called Alberta Focus in Calgary. Because we bring our international delegates out and we take them to Banff and show them how amazing the province is. But Jorg was one of those individuals we brought out 2015, and he's been going to BreakOut West ever since.
Yeah. And that's been pretty successful. Like he signed 2 Bears North for sure from Alberta Focus.
Yeah. So if you haven't been to BreakOut West, go to BreakOut West. It's in Winnipeg, September 24th to 28th.
Yeah, it's a similar range of time. Definitely somewhere in there.
No, but I can't speak highly enough about going to BreakOut West and the opportunity that it provides for meeting internationals. And again, there's not a lot of places, opportunities for that domestic showcase development.
Yeah, Alberta Focus, though, also we should, pimp that too. I think everybody in this room, if you're an Alberta-based artist, should be, paying attention to this opportunity.
Yeah, and if you're not an artist that's selected to perform, come to the showcase, because again, the artists that are on stage get the delegates watching them, but the people in the audience
get the delegates chatting with them.
Get the delegates to talk to them.
and I think, from my perspective too, is just seeing the type of shows, like getting to know like what the type of shows. What are the presentation that are getting people excited? Because I think for Alberta Focus, if I'm, at least the way you used to do, is you actually sent all the bands to the delegates and they picked. So maybe that's not happening anymore, but
it's shifted because our relationship with BreakOut West for the pre-BreakOut West is we work a lot more closely now on like I would say, like, again, the programming at BreakOut West has improved so much. Like, Liam does a killer job, but it's, I would say, like, the programming and, like, the type of artists and the delegates that brought out is so intentional in the fact that, like, you go, there's going to be a business opportunity, there's business development. It's like, so it's programmed a little bit different, but it really goes hand in hand in how BreakOut West programs every year, and the markets that are target markets, and they do an incredible job of listening to the artists
Yeah, I wanted to show you something earlier you said is that like you're paying attention to what your audience is like looking for in terms of export opportunity. I think people like us are the exact same thing. Like honestly, a great example, Arlo Maverick, I met with Arlo Maverick earlier in the year. We were talking about Southeast Asia, and it became a bit of a focus of the conference this year. I mean, obviously it's going to expand over time. We did something on Japan this year. There's also a piece on Japan right after this that you guys should attend with Yuya, who has sent Canadian and Alberta artists to Japan. And that's the kind of feedback like we want to hear is like we really want to service the artists from the region and not just like kind of see what comes back in the application, because obviously by then, you know, like we try to be really responsive, but like if you can tell me in January, you're like, hey, like I actually have this like incredible like opportunity with this wonky person in, I don't know, Indonesia, like could you bring them out? Like that's the stuff I want to hear. It's like if I can like directly service your business as a result of this, like a connection you already have, or maybe something that you know is meaningful to you, or might like really tip the scales. Like our networks are, in a sense, only as far limited as like, you know, our artist networks. Like you're part of our community, you're members of Alberta Music. Like we want to be responsive to those types of things. Like we want to cultivate opportunities in the markets that you care about. We also want to bring out the kind of music companies that are responsive to the music that you make. Mm-hmm. Like I think like ultimately, the thing I always say about BreakOut West is like, my goal is to convince you not to move to Montreal or Toronto. It's because like I want you to live in the place that you can afford to live, that you want to live, that you're inspired to live, that your band lives, that your producer lives, and that we can bring those opportunities to you and we can help foster those connections so you can like go and do those tours, or you can go and work with that producer, you know, but you can come back and reinvest that back into your local community.
Totally. Amazing. I think we're running out of time, but maybe we have 1 or 2 minutes. Does anyone have any questions? Any? Yeah.
I have a question. I'm wondering if you've seen any like artists or their teams employ tactics in these markets before going to the conference and having success with that.
Yeah. We've seen artists that have decided, you know, they've made a decision on like a market they want to go to, or they've been accepted into the festival, and you know that becomes part of their marketing strategy as.
Yeah, you almost 100% should be doing that. Yeah. There's almost no reason not to be doing that.
Yeah, I guess there's like a chicken egg question with that too, because it's like, are you waiting until you've got the festival opportunity to start cultivating that, or are you maybe applying to that festival because you've got some level of attention there that you already know that you want? Like, have you maybe like, hey, I'm going to work with this, really want to work with this producer, send him the email. He's responsive. Okay, great. Actually, he lives, 100 kilometers away from Brighton. I know the Great Escape is happening there. Mm-hmm. I'm going to apply to the Great Escape. I'm going to email Carly and be like, hey, I really want to do the Great Escape. I'm going to redevelop or really focus on the UK. While I'm out there, I'm going to meet with this producer here. And it really makes that case all the way down the chain. So I think, my only point would be like, you don't need to wait for these opportunities. Yeah. You can cultivate them where you have, and then that will help make the case when you're actually going to be like, well, okay, how am I actually going to get myself out there? How am I actually going to start that export process? So to just like follow organically, like what's going on? Like what kind of music am I making? What kind of companies support that music? What kind of producers work in that field? What kind of songwriters do I want to collaborate with? Like where does that stuff sell big tickets? Kind of identify what those things are, do a little bit of research. Maybe look at your Spotify numbers. I mean, there's so much data out there now. Get that 1 month subscription to Chartmetric. Yeah, there's like Next Big Sound or whatever, and like just like figure out what's going on there and try to like dive a little bit deeper, like do some research. The more research you do, I think will make the case better when you're going down these process. This is just like, I think like a thing you can, an ultimate pipeline once you've already accumulated your stuff to send down it.
Yeah, I would just add at minimum be aware that there's a potential path for you in that market. You know, if there's no artists that are touring that market that kind of sound like you or kind of have, then it's probably not the place to focus, you know. Or if it's a super competitive market like the US and you're not doing good numbers somewhere else, then maybe I would consider maybe focusing on Canada or focusing on an easier market to get into. So the US takes a lot of money.
Would you start like a press or radio campaign though, like prior to going? Is kind of my question. Like, how would you kind of drum up interest that you're going to be there at this conference? Say you already know you've been selected.
Ooh, I think if you have the money to run a press campaign.
I would also say like it depends on the genre and the region you're going to. I think if you have the means to run like release a song and run a radio campaign and then be there
Yeah.
present. That would be amazing because you're like right in front of everyone. Be like, oh, I just released a song. It's this, and they'll look it up, and you're like, oh, I've heard that. It's running on so and so. So yeah, if you have the means to run campaigns while you're leading up to attending, I think that's a great marketing strategy, but that's not always possible.
Yeah, it's definitely maybe not the same channels of funding, but it's like if you got a record coming out and you're like, okay, well, I can align this with the showcase that I'm doing and put out a tour there and kind of make that thing work. And then your press campaign aligns with that. That's really great. I think I'm a little dubious about just like making a $3,000 spend on like a press campaign to do South by or, which I think is tempting.
I think it completely depends on the market, the genre, the size of the conference festival. I think there's so many aspects that play into that decision.
Yeah, and say if you have $3,000 and you're going to maybe Reeperbahn or something, or a smaller festival, I would maybe consider, I would put maybe all that money in digital marketing, promoting your little, this is what our show looks like, promote that to locals, because if you can get 100 locals to show up to your Reeperbahn show, that actually might make a difference. Like that actually might make some people turn their head. So, and it wouldn't be that difficult to do, but $3,000 to a PR campaign, I think most music industry people are telling you not to spend money in PR nowadays. For the most part, maybe country is slightly different.
Yeah, I would say country is the one where, the radio track or the press campaign and stuff like that.
Still quite powerful.
Yeah.
Anyone else? Go for a question? Yeah.
I have a question about the thought process of the export programming. Kind of was mentioned yesterday, like when you do like a specifically Alberta or just a Canadian showcase at a place like South by Southwest, there's so much going on, or at any of these American festivals, only having bands from Canada on that bill, not integrating it with any local bands, seems ineffective. Like, 'cause when you do
Like a Canada House kind of.
well, just in general, show booking 101 or show trades, you're gonna have a local on the bill, because then they're gonna bring your friends, you're gonna meet bands in the local market, you're gonna create real community connections. But if you're just showcasing a bunch of bands from a different country, who is that for? Like, it seems like only the Canadians are gonna show up, and therefore, like as you mentioned, you play these showcases in different countries and no one's there.
It's a good point.
You gotta do integrated showcases with say if you're doing a thing in Texas, have 2 Texas bands, 2 big Hamilton bands.
Yeah, they're all different. And I think this is one thing, we're cognizant of at BreakOut West is we really don't want this. So at BreakOut West, every act plays twice.
Yeah.
And we put them on 2 different bills. We try not to have them play with the same artist twice. We try to put them at different times and in different venues and on different days to just give them a sense. Maybe one of those shows is more stripped back, or one of them is more full band. Not all of them are this good. South by is a great example where it's sometimes you get in and you only get the one official play, and it might be, ours isn't, the BreakOut West Showcase is an official play at South by. It might be your only official play, and I would say, that's not enormously the best strategy. I think particularly at something like South by, you should cultivate as many as you can. You should place them on officials as well as you can, or see if they can put you on others. Say, for example, some labels have label showcases or agencies. So if you're like, oh, well, I'm playing the BreakOut West Showcase, but also Paper Bag's down there. I'm on Paper Bag, so I'll play the Paper Bag Showcase. Or actually last time MBF went down, he played our showcase. He's like, I'm going to do this wonky pop-up at this coffee shop. And he's that kind of guy for sure. Not every band works that way, but that's the kind of thinking you can do. Something like Folk Alliance, same deal. It's just collect as many opportunities as these things as you can. Sometimes you don't get what you want. I have an artist next week playing at M from Montreal, which is an amazing showcase festival that I really like, but it's one 20-minute play.
Yeah.
And I wasn't able to secure them other stuff out of that, which can be tricky. It's more integrated than what you're saying. You're totally right. Canada House can be a trap. The thing and not because it's bad, it's wonderful, it's an amazing thing, but you need to think beyond it.
Yeah, and I think it depends too on the market really. In The Great Escape in Brighton, Canada House is lined up around the block the entire day. It has such a reputation of go to Canada House, people want to see the talent that's being brought. Reeperbahn is really similar.
Canada House is also a second play at Great Escape, so props
Great
to
Escape
Alberta
is,
Music
yeah,
for
it's
that.
second place. So some of the festivals, you're playing Canada House, but you get a second play. For Canada House at South by Southwest, it's an unofficial showcase. So you do need to secure an official showcase, and we offer that automatic unofficial second play. So yeah, like I say, I agree where it's like it's not the best strategy to have like all the Canadians all the time, but in certain regions it has the investment into that market by SEMA and Alberta Music and others have garnered that reputation if people want to go to Canada House.
Yeah, Canada House at the Great Escape is like your play at that will be better than your official play, 100%.
Very often.
I guarantee
very
it.
often.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wondered about that, just because I find when you, as a band, you play somebody from the market, that's how you meet people in the market, that's how you get real organic reach. But if you can't get people from the market to your show, and you're just getting like industry people, next time you come to Texas, it's not gonna matter, because it's just kind of like, it's just like the meeting of the networking amongst the band and the bill. Anytime you play with a band on the bill, you're like, become best buddies, right?
Yeah.
So it's kind of always like a good.
Yeah.
You know, that, if you can get that connection, then it's like an actual.
But you're making such a great point that like the artist networking at these things is invaluable.
Yeah.
And it's like, yeah, can you like go to like, especially if like you go to Texas, be like, man, amazing psych scene down there. It's like if you like make relatively psyche music, you go down there, you meet 5 bands. Go like meet the guy from like fucking Levitation or whatever, and like make your pitch and like really try to make a thing out of that, and spend the time focusing on that. And maybe if you bring that band up to Canada and you book maybe 5 shows for them in Western Canada, and then same too, you trade that back down there and let them headline for shows for you. That's amazing networking. Like just I think just as valuable as being like I'm gonna like meet all these labels and these publicists is just as valuable.
Great. Yeah.
There's 2 questions, yeah.
I think you have your hand first.
Yeah, I was gonna say that Talent Music Week as well in Canada House, like that was, because I played it in 2018, 2019, and it was, 2018 was packed, right? In addition to the additional showcase we have, which was all hip-hop, right? One thing that I think can help us as Canadians when going to these markets and playing these like Canadian specific shows is that if you know who the other Canadian acts are on the bill, pool your resources to actually promote the show properly, so then that way you all get a great turnout, as opposed to just be like, I've got to make sure people just at my showcase, because you never know who can be with another band that to support the other band might actually be yourself as well too. So just that sense of community as we go over to these other markets, like really working with each other to actually make sure the shows are successful, whether it's creating a digital campaign team or coming to a poster, because a lot of the showcases are just promoted as far as like this festival taking place, but having something specific to that night, I think would be helpful too, you know?
That's a great piece of advice. I
Yeah.
like that community building. Very cool.
Yeah, I will also, I think one other thing that Arlo Maverick is really great at, one, you should go listen to Arlo Maverick's music, but like one other thing is really great at content creation, like really using these as an opportunity to make great content, and like really spend the time, and then you can really see it. You can follow and trace that journey and see how that goes. But you're totally right. Also, Talent Music Week is a great one. There's still a Canadian showcase with Women in Music Canada, I believe, now. So, and Women in Music Canada, of course, is open to, I think, folks of all non-male gender persuasions. I think it's open to genderqueer people and trans-masc people. I think it's just not open to, well, maybe it's open to cis men, I don't know. But anyway, Women in Music Canada is a wonderful organization. They have an Alberta an Alberta chapter now. You should be a member. I'm a member of Women in Music Canada. I think it's a wonderful organization, and that's a great festival that you should look into.
Women in Music Canada has a mixer tomorrow at 10 a.m. You should be there.
Everyone is welcome to the mixer. So,
I'll be there.
yes, please come.
Great.
I think you had a question?
Maybe
or
one
comment?
more?
Yeah, I had 2. When you were talking about those applications, like I want to build my fan base is like a bad answer. Could you either a fictional or a real instance of like what an artist would say that's a good answer, and like for a big market, like I'm sure it's different for different places or whatever, but just, and then I have a second question.
Yeah, for sure. Sorry, I didn't mean to talk too much, but I field a lot of these, and I will say I don't mean to say that like building your fan base is a bad answer. I think it's just like it's the beginning of a longer answer,
I mean,
which is
how are
yeah.
you building your fan
Oh,
base?
totally. It's a good question. But say, for example, not all of those festivals are very audience oriented. Some of them are a little bit more industry centric. So like knowing what that festival is or what that thing that you're attending is, being like, okay, well, am I building audience here? Okay, great. What is the thing I'm intending to do that? Like, I'm going to be running these ads, or I'm going to be running this press campaign, or like, if your goal really is audience development in that place, like what are you doing to accomplish that? But I think a lot of the time at these events, it's actually maybe less about audience development and maybe more about industry or market development in other ways. To be like, I'm looking to meet labels, I'm looking to meet agents, I'm looking to meet publicists, I'm a songwriter and I want to meet songwriters or publishers, or like I'm a producer and I want to develop new clients and bring them back to my studio, or like what are you doing and how is that working? And then what is the activities that you're intending to take part in? And like, what's your attachment to this specific thing? Being like, okay, well, I'm going to Reeperbahn. What's my relationship with Germany? Like, why is this a market that I care about versus any other market? So it's like, oh, I looked at my chart metric. I know that I have X amount of streams. I know that this one particular city is in my top 5. So I'm going to make sure that I book a show there after I get my Reeperbahn show. I really want to work with Double Duck Records. So I really want to work with Pop-Up. Or I really want to work with these German companies that put out this music that sounds a lot like me that I really like, and I've seen that they've participated in these events before. It's a little research-centric. There's like a lot you have to do. But that's why I think a lot of us would tell you to really narrow your vision and be like, okay, what are my real goals? Like, apply to everything, sure, but like, what are the places that really matter to me? And what do I want to get? Like, what would I do when I got there? And do a little bit of that work before you actually make the application, because it'll help make the case. So on the other side, when they see that, they'll be like, oh, you want to meet like somebody from Pop-Up Records or Inc. Music or whatever? Oh, they're on the delegate list. They were on the delegate list last year. This is going to be easy. I'm going to be very easy to set them up with a meeting there. Or it'll be like, oh, you already have streams in Germany. You already have streams in this city. Or you've already been running a German press campaign or something like that. It's already a much easier sell. There's a lot of people apply to these opportunities. Like BreakOut West, we accept less than 10% of submissions, absolutely. And so I think if you come to BreakOut West and you're like, I want to build my fan base, and like that's wonderful, and I want you to do that, but like BreakOut West is not the best opportunity to do that. Like if you want to like go and play to audiences, just like go to the same city a month later and play a ticket, like play a show, and work on that. BreakOut West is like an industry opportunity, and so I think that's typically where I think this is the funny thing about BreakOut West is we move to a different city every year, so it's like it's honestly not always. Even sometimes we actually have a hard time getting audiences out to a city or to our shows just because we have to reteach people what we are, because we might not have been in that city for 10 years previous. And sometimes you'll play these shows, and I think actually BreakOut West shows are pretty good, but sometimes at or CMW, any of these other places, you might play to 5 people whose arms are crossed. But if those 5 people whose arms are crossed are, an agent from 7 Artists or from, Feldman or Pac-An, like maybe those are the right 5 people with their arms crossed at the back of the room. And that's like just yeah, exactly. Well, not necessarily testing you, I think. Sometimes, they're texting in the back of the room. These people see a lot of things and they're not always incredibly enthused. It's, there's not to say that there's anything bad about being like, I want to develop my audience. That's like really important. But sometimes that's actually not the primary mechanism that these things do.
I think at a conference festival, it's great if you do, if you want to put that in your application, but that's the starting point of why. And if you go to these events and you meet with labels and agents and nothing comes out of it, that's okay. It's part of the process. It's part of the process. It's like it's not going to happen immediately, but you're gaining those relationships for the next time you have a release or the next time perhaps you're going to go there. So it's really part of the building of your team or your network is to identify why you want to go to that region.
Oh, you're making such a great point too, that sometimes you are going to walk away with these things feeling like nothing has happened, but it's the part of a relationship. Ideally, you do these things because you want to reinvest. And I think if you don't, I think it's unlikely that you go to any of these things and that everything happens for you at that moment. I think typically it's a building process. And I think if you intend to come back and keep doing more, that's where you're going to see those returns. Like Carly is saying, it's like you meet that agent and they don't sign you on the spot, but next time you come back, you play the club show, and then the third time you come back, you're like, hey, I've already demonstrated that I can bring out 50 people to this club show. I'm ready for a hard ticket show now. So put me in the 150 person hard ticket venue or whatever, and start from there. Start that building process.
And then
Yeah, go ahead.
I was just gonna say, is there value in saying booking 3 whatever gigs in the States, doing those gigs, or do you see value in that so that you can say you did a US tour? You know what I'm saying? There's even for the places you're already doing, oh, this artist I love is on US tour. Do you know what I mean? Is it just worth doing that? I'm sure there's benefits going to those places, but just is there anything just
I have some thoughts, but I'm shouting a lot.
Go for it.
Oh, yeah, I think it's a good question. I think, yeah, it's like you want to build a narrative with your artist trajectory, and I think sometimes, like, being a road dog is part of that. And, like, you know, we have some friends, there's a really great band in Calgary that I really love called 36. They just put out a really great record, and they play in the States, like, sometimes like 150 dates a year. It's, like, kind of outrageous. And that's, like, just, like, part of the narrative that they're building and the thing that they're doing. But I think a lot of acts, like, that's just not, it's not going to return a lot of stuff. Not everybody can afford to or wants to live that kind of dirtbag lifestyle either. Sometimes you need to be more specific, more strategic. Like if you're a band like my friend Elise manages this great band with a hip hop band from Winnipeg called Super Duty Tough Work. It's a big ensemble. Hard to get them out, right? It's really expensive. They have to be very specific about the opportunities that they cultivate. They demand high guarantees, so they can't road dog that show really at all. And of course, the band show is what's selling. They did a South by Southwest showcase. It's kind of like drummer and rapper, but it's not the same show. They're selling the band show, so they got to be really strategic about what they cultivate. So I think there is some benefit to building a narrative where you're like, yeah, I'm exporting, I'm doing lots of stuff. I'm playing shows in the States, I'm playing shows in the UK or Germany, but you got to reap those returns as well. You have to like make that work for you. But sometimes I think there is scene politics to this, where it's like where it's like people don't perceive you as being maybe as good or maybe as like valuable to the scene until you're doing real export.
Yeah, and I think it's intentional. Like if you want to go play a string of shows in Texas because you want to build an audience in Texas, people are going to look at that and be like, oh, they're investing in that market. That's smart. That's really good. But if you're playing a show in Texas and then you're like, oh, actually, I want to build my audience in New York, it's like, cool. Then why did you play Texas? So it's like U.S. is really big. So it's like you have to look at like what market you're playing in, what your intention to that market is. But yeah, I don't think anyone's ever going to. It's very rare that it's like, oh, you're investing in playing shows. That's garbage.
We're getting the wrap up.
Oh, wrap up.
Sweet.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks everyone for coming and hanging out. And next is the Japan.
Yeah.
Japan. Stick around for that.